And joining us from the south of France today is Daess 1drea. I got it right.
Yes, thank you for having me. So excited to connect again.
Yes. So a little bit of background. I met you, 3 weeks ago, maybe? Was it 3 weeks ago? Yeah, it was.
Just
Wow.
about. Yeah.
Almost 3 weeks ago at a consciousness seminar,
Yeah.
which I was a very last minute attendee of. And I had absolutely no idea what was going to be talked about. I knew I'd listened to the podcast with this particular Dr. Tom Campbell, who's a former NASA physicist and consciousness not investigator,
Researcher.
researcher. That's the word. And he was with Rizwan Virk, who's quite famous with his theory of that we live in a
The
hologram,
simulation. Yeah, the
the
simulation theory.
simulation.
Yeah.
So two great talkers. So I knew about that, and I paid my money, turned up on the train, and what a day, huh? Or
Yeah,
that was amazing.
it was.
We'll talk about that in a sec, but just let's, if you could tell us about yourself and where people can find you, and then we can crack on.
Sure. So I am an American living in the south of France. I've been here for 15 years. I am an integrative physician, a consciousness researcher, and a bit of a nerd when it comes to paranormal and psi experiences. I've had a lot of these mystical experiences since my childhood. And in 2005, I had an ego death experience, a true like out of body awakening that rocked my world. Maybe we'll talk about that. And from that time in 2005, when I left my body, I have completely shifted everything in my life. Started researching consciousness and neuroscience, traveled the world sitting in shamanic ceremonies and with different cultural traditions, including with and without psychedelics or breath work, drumming and chanting. And I've decided to share what I've learned since that near death experience in a documentary film, which is why I was also in Basel to interview Tom Campbell for the film. And yeah, that's a little bit about me. I teach and I facilitate retreats. Um, I publish books. I also run a publishing company. So that's a little bit about me.
Wow, that is wow. Okay, that's a lot of stuff. But you're also a registered physician. You are what we'd
Correct.
call a doctor, a
That's
real
right.
doctor.
That's right. I
Des,
went to
uh,
medical school, did the residency training, took care of patients for many, many years. That's right.
I love that phrase, a real doctor.
Right.
You're not a real doctor. We have to say that nowadays, don't we? That, oh, you used to be a real doctor, but now you don't practice that anymore.
Right. Right. People have all different ways of looking at it. I do still work in a clinical capacity. I don't work the way that doctors in America used to work, in a brick and mortar place, seeing patient after patient, trying to get to a certain quota. I work with people in person and around the world via Zoom sometimes. So I've maintained my medical license in America, but I don't practice medicine in
Hmm,
that way. It's more
interesting.
integrative.
And let me guess, your out of body experience pushed you into a new direction. Let me guess. Am I right?
Pretty much, yeah. Yeah.
Okay. See, there's always something like that, isn't there?
Yeah.
You're
But the
not the
funny
first
thing is,
person.
it actually pushed me. I think it was just a destiny redirect. Like, I truly believe that we all are on a path toward our destiny. And you could think of that as a fixed thing. I don't think it's fixed. I think it's changeable, modifiable, including when we choose. But I know now that it has always been part of my life's mission to be teaching about consciousness and spirituality and serving as a sort of bridge between medical science and consciousness. And at the time, I was working as a medical doctor. I was working as a documentary host for Discovery Channel. And I was missing the spiritual piece that is really like my true path. And so I think that, yes, the ego death experience moved me in a new direction, but I think what it really did is move me in a truer direction, like where I'm meant to be.
I get that. So I watched one of your TED Talks. You've done a few, and you mentioned the fact that were on Oprah Winfrey, and was that in your previous capacity, as in what you were doing in the past?
Yes, that was just before the near-death experience. While I was working for Discovery Channel, I was their medical director and spokesperson. So I was on all of the TV, all the time, and Oprah was doing a show about health and called up the network to get some footage and asked if they had a physician who could speak about what it's like for the African American population to deal with diabetes. And
Mm.
I was the perfect candidate for that. So that was the first time I got on the Oprah show.
That's probably a different podcast, but I was going to ask you, if you can give me a one-liner, what's the solution to the diabetes epidemic?
Well, it's not a single solution, but we do know that nutrition, fitness, all of the things that you would normally think of to keep the body tuned into how to use food or avoid having insulin spikes. But the thing that I noticed in my wellness center was the piece that's missing for most people is consciousness. And you can look at consciousness as being awareness. It's being aware and knowing that you have choice. So for many people in the United States, now mind you, this was early 2000s, there was a lot less health information on TV. Like, even though we think of it as pretty basic, a lot of people were faked into thinking that like these fake butters or processed food was okay because it said it was fortified. And what we found people were doing is eating poorly, um, but also not knowing that they had the power to change their physiology. Like, we think of only drugs as being able to like rev up things or slow things down, but our consciousness, our own intent, whether that's through imagination or meditation, visualization, and breath work, you can shift your physiology. And the most important thing about that is you can start to rewire the brain so that it's not holding on to calories so much. And, we happen to have a particular protocol that worked wonders for that, which is why we got really popular at my wellness center. But nowadays, most people know that. So you can find most of this information online.
So, okay, I find that I do like to go into the health and the diet aspect to be basically the first step on your road to recovery, shall we say. So maybe we can talk about that another time, but I want to stick in the subject at hand. So for that seminar we went to, like I said, I came in there completely open. I was just very interested to see what was going on, and I'd listened to a couple of his podcasts on huge podcast shows, massive American ones, and I find this is right up my street because I'd read the Robert Monroe, the first book he did, Journeys Out of the Body, which I recommend everyone should read because it's pretty fascinating.
It's a good
and
one.
wild.
Yeah,
it's just a good read, and whether you believe it or not is largely irrelevant.
Yeah.
And I just after that conference seminar meeting, let's call it a meeting. I'm listening now to the Journeys Far Away, which is I think his second last book or last book, and it's it's very, very fascinating. So if you don't really understand, if you haven't read the book, you don't know anything about Dr. Robert Monroe, is what he actually did was going out of his body. He was able to get himself into almost like a trance-like state, but he was conscious of it, and then he would leave his body, leave his physical, or not physically.
His consciousness would leave his physical body on the bed, and
the operating system would leave his body.
There you go.
Behind and go and explore the universe. And not just one, or dimensions, universes, whatever. He'd go to all sorts of different places and get information, and it's really fascinating stuff. And it turns out when I went to this meeting that Thomas Campbell was one of his early subjects. So he was there right at the very beginning. So that was a fascinating thing. How did you first come across Tom Campbell?
I think it may have started with Bob Monroe as well. Although I was introduced to the binaural beats with a lot of static, the old Bob Monroe tapes, probably 20 years ago, and yeah, maybe more, 21 or 22 years ago. I think for me, what turned me on to Tom Campbell is I've personally felt like we're living in a simulation, but more like a video game. So, I was born in 1970. I grew up with Atari. I grew up, riding my bike with my best friend Allison down to 7-Eleven, where you drop in a quarter and you got to play these games. And it was like I knew that I am the player using this joystick to control my avatar. Maybe that's Ms. Pac-Man or it's Frogger or whatever. And when I had this out of body experience, I saw this big ball of light, like the sun, but like source. And then I saw these little droplets of light dripping down to the earth. And this little droplet is like the soul, an offshoot of the divine consciousness. And when we incarnate, it's up to us to determine who we are. And at that point, I was very controlled by the beliefs of my family, the beliefs of the media, and the American Medical Association. So for me, it was quite a revelation to say, I'm supposed to be the one choosing who I will be. And so it reminds me very much of a video game. And so as I started researching simulation theory and finding other people that had similar beliefs, I found Tom Campbell's work. And his trilogy is called My Big Toe, My Big Theory of Everything. And just getting through the first book, I was having so many light bulb experiences. Because, like what you experienced with Bob Monroe's work, when you read these stories, you're like, wow, this is so fantastical. But when I read the first book in the trilogy, Tom is also sharing how he started his out of body experiments as just a kid. There was no binaural beats, there was no center he was going to. He was doing this on his own and had pretty significant experiences. And for me, what that did is it normalized the things I experienced as a child, because I knew I had a connection to other dimensions. I just called it the spirit world. I didn't have language as a kid, whether it was hearing voices, knowing things before they happened, having precognitive dreams, feeling someone else's pain, even across miles. So reading the first book in the trilogy and hearing, listening to Tom tell his stories was like, okay, I'm not a complete weirdo. There are more of us out there. And then when you hear how Tom describes why would we have these experiences? Why would I have precognitive dreams? Why would we have out of body experiences? Why might an alien come and visit you? And the way he describes it is this larger consciousness system that we are one with will sometimes give you these little nudges to kind of wake you up so that you're not thinking that this matrix of 3D is the real deal. It's like you get these little nudges that open your mind. And so I love how you said, if you've never heard of Bob Monroe, read this first book, and whether you believe it or not, it's fine, because whether you believe it or not, listening to what other people are experiencing will likely have the effect of opening your mind to say, well, what if? And if we can do that, then you start to notice things like the larger consciousness system or source or whatever wants us all to wake up. Like that's really the ultimate game we're here to play. We are these little droplets of consciousness that went through an amnesia when we incarnated in a human avatar. And the real purpose of this game is to wake up, to realize who you really are. You are consciousness and you have choice. And the best choices for everyone to evolve, are choices that come from love. If you're coming from fear, you're coming from the ego, that construct that the avatar has in human form. But who you really are is consciousness. And so that's how I discovered Tom and have been really just a fan of the work and started volunteering for the Consciousness Hub. And that's why I was in Basel to really connect with the folks and then shoot this documentary.
Yeah, it was so cool because I felt when I turned up, I felt a bit of an outsider. and not an imposter as such, because I was just new to it. And I assumed wrongly, in my part, that, well, I didn't actually know what to expect. That's probably the most honest thing I can say, is I turned up with an open mind. I had a few preconceptions, but I was there to learn effectively and hear some stories. But what the message I was getting back was from people who've had these experiences, is that it was very freeing for people to be able to speak in public about their experiences, which they may have spoken to their friends or their family and been ridiculed and said, shut up.
Exactly.
What a load of nonsense. So I had I'm pretty, like I say, I'm pretty sure it was an out of body experience when I was young, and it wasn't. For years, I thought it was my mind playing tricks on me.
Mm.
And we're at the swimming pool, me and my brother, and this is in Scotland. This is, indoor. There's very few outdoor pools in Scotland for obvious reasons. And the game, your bigger brother was holding me under the water, and I'd come up, get a breath, and he'd put me back down, and that happened a good few times. And he was holding me under, and I was at this point fighting for my life. I felt like I was gonna die, and I had this very, very clear 4K image of me, and I remember I was wearing red swimming trunks, and I was thrashing, and I could see myself and my brother holding me down, and I was underwater, and I could hear me, the muffled underwater screams.
Yeah.
And when I came back up, I was straight back in when he let me up, and I was crying and terrified, basically. And at the time, so this is like, you break this down for me. At the time, afterwards, I processed it. I must have been 6 or 7, 8 maybe. And at the time, I thought that's crazy. That's my imagination. I saw myself from outside, but it was so clear and so vivid that I'd blocked it out. And then I read this book, and that came back to me. And I thought, wow, what was that? And I, had I not suppressed that thought for so long, and we're talking nearly 40 years before I actually spoke about it again, was very profound. And that when I read this book, he's talking about going out of his body. And it seems that if you get into a heightened state of, maybe for me it was fear, or I guess it would have been fear, that something took over. And I don't know. I'll let you try and explain that. What do you think happened?
Well, thank you for sharing that. It is a fascinating kind of mini out of body experience. And for me, it's super clear, having studied so many of these out of body and near death experiences. You're absolutely right on when you say that there's some sort of activated state. So it could be fear, it could be ecstasy,
hypoxia. I couldn't breathe.
Well, that was the physical state.
Yeah.
Right? So what you said was something took over. And I would rephrase that as the physical avatar was in such danger, in hypoxia, that your consciousness, which is never shut off, it's always on, it's just not always in control. So your consciousness is like, oh, let me just kind of separate from this flailing body over here, and you could see it. Right? But you weren't gone long enough that you needed to be resuscitated. So when you came back into being able to breathe, your oxygen returns, these higher brain centers kick back in, and your awareness or consciousness is just sort of hanging out. So we see these kinds of separation of consciousness from body in lucid dreams, of course, with psychedelics, with holotropic breath work, but also, as you described, either being in a state of extreme fear. It could be extreme pain. When people are being traumatized, they will often leave their bodies. Now, some of them will be able to see, like you could see the body there under the water. Sometimes people don't. They just blank out. They just know that they're not in that body that was experiencing that excruciating pain. And then for those that can be in a sense of ecstasy or joy, I've had clients tell me about experiences just walking down the street and looking at nature and just seeing something so breathtaking and beautiful that they have this sort of expansive, out of their normal consciousness experience.
Mm.
So for you, it was the hypoxia first that put the human avatar in danger, and you get to a level where you're losing consciousness that's associated with brain function. That goes down, and all that's left is consciousness, which is not tied to brain function or oxygen levels. Your true self. That's just like, whoa, there he is, flailing. When's he going to let me up for air here? You know?
Yeah. And obviously I was in a lot of pain as well because of
Yeah.
your lungs are burning. But, and you had out of body experiences when you were a kid as well,
Yes, mine were more of the emotional pain.
not the
I would
traumatic
say
ones.
no. I happened to grow up in a very toxic family, and there was a lot of physical abuse before my parents got divorced. And it led me to be really depressed. I was a very depressed kid. And so I think my coping mechanism, I didn't fully dissociate from my body, but I would just be in other dimensions, not far off like weird with aliens, but just in another space, another realm. I've always had kind of a vivid imagination, and back in those days, I watched all of the scary movies, the horror movies. So these ideas of other universes, or like the Twilight Zone, all of those things really spoke to me. So for me, leaving my body was not something I tried to do. Um, it would just happen from time to time, especially if I was feeling sad or lonely. But the experience that I had in 2005, that one was brought on by an intense depression. And I had been, with all the success that I had with this big wellness center and the TV shows in America, I was really missing out on my love for art, which is singing and creating music and all of the spirituality. And the night before that event, I was in Saint-Tropez, a place that I know you know well. I was in Saint-Tropez and I was invited to sing at this club. Um, and I'm there and I'm singing and I'm in this state of rapture, just feeling like I was one with everything, one with the music, one with the people, one with the sea. And it was, what we call a peak experience. Well, the next day when I got back to Cannes, I woke up and I was like, what the F? Like there, I felt completely alive, like myself, loved, and I felt like I loved myself for the first time. And as soon as I realized that I'd have to go back to America, I just felt this welling up of depression just strangling me. And I cried out to God and said, take it, take my life, take my body, take my business. I don't know what I'm doing with it. And I flung myself onto the bed, just crying, just really feeling like I had already made an agreement earlier in my life. We can maybe talk about that when I heard a voice, but I had made an agreement in my teens to not take my life. So at this age of 34, I'm crying out to God and I said, I can't do this anymore. I just don't want this life. And that's when I saw this light, and my consciousness was pulled into this light and had this full on near death like experience with the life review and the vision of these droplets and being told that I could choose. And as soon as I said yes, like, okay, I'll choose differently. And that's when I saw this future vision where in this vision, I was living in France. I was walking hand in hand with a child. And at that time, I was 34 and single. And I was singing professionally and healing with my hands. So I get all of this in a split second. And I'm like, really, God? You're going to make me one of those woo-woo doctors now? Everything about the vision, though, looked really great. So I was like, I'll take it. And as soon as I said yes, I was right back in my body. And I remember sitting up and like wiping my tears, like, what the F? And it took me a little bit of time to close the business, do the things. But a few weeks after I got back to America, I met my daughter's father. I became pregnant. And a few years later, I moved to the south of France, where I've now been for 15 years. And maybe we'll get into the healing. I know you're into healing. The healing with the hands thing, that came true in 2011. And yeah, so I'm here doing it and fascinated by how so many other people have these turning points. And some of them are mystical and some of them they've never told anyone, kind of like you. Like, I didn't share a lot of my story for years because I was a well-known TV personality at that time. And I thought people would think I was weird or that I'd lose my credibility. So it was like, I didn't really start talking. So what you said earlier about Basil, about feeling this sense of safety in being seen and sharing, that's definitely what I came away with. Because when you're talking to people about consciousness, people who've had these experiences, there's this sense of recognition. It's like, okay, we're not
Hmm.
complete weirdos. No one's going to kill us. We can actually share and be our true selves. And that's a lot of what my work is about now.
Yeah. I just find it such an interesting subject to speak about. It's my favorite subject to speak about. So if I go to a dinner party and, I don't really know anyone, what do you do in your spare time? In my spare time, I do podcasts and what do you talk about? It's like, well, consciousness, you
Yeah,
know,
I love it.
UFOs, ancient history, whatever I find interesting.
Yeah.
And what always, or it used to be that was just, you wouldn't bring that up in polite society.
Right.
You'd be thought, and that's in my lifetime. And you're 3 years older than me. You look great, by the way.
Thank
Whatever you're
you.
doing is working
Just
well.
just celebrated 55
Good
last
stuff.
week.
Good stuff. Oh, okay. So yeah. And I started talking about these things, and the amount of people, old friends of mine, guys, I was in the army. I was an army officer for 9 years, and I talk about stuff with. In fact, the last podcast I did was with former special forces, British Army soldier who I used to serve with, a friend of mine, and we ended up speaking. We were supposed to be talking about something else, and we spent more than an hour talking about consciousness. And I said, I've got this. Wait till you see who I've got on coming up next. And these things you could never have talked about
Yeah.
in those
Yeah.
days. But so what I find now is if I pull out, I just straight up and say, no, I like to investigate consciousness and, not paranormal stuff, but the things you're talking about as well. And it's amazing now how receptive people are. And if people don't respond, then I just don't bother. I don't think there's any, you have to be, I think you need to have, you need to have certainly an open mind. You can be skeptical. I'm still skeptical. But at the same time, I really want to believe all this, wholeheartedly. Yeah. But at the same time, you get a lot of scammers and shysters out there.
Yeah.
And so what did you think? So at this meeting we were at, the kids and the adults the mindsight
I was
who
just
could see
thinking about
things,
that. Yeah.
who could see things with their eyes blindfolded. What did you? I mean, they explained the mechanism, but I didn't really. The way I saw it, or good little pun there, is that so another thing that happened, and this is a quite important part before I would say what I was going to say, is I went through a phase of if I woke up or if I just in between sleep and the liminal state, I think it's called, isn't it? Between sleeping and wakefulness. And it was dark in my room and I could see not perfectly, I could see the outlines and shapes of things in the room. And I'm looking around and I could see it. And then I realized my eyes were closed. And that happened a few times. And I thought, wow, that's odd. That started happening after reading that Robert Monroe book. And so I can't explain it. I really can't. How that's even possible. And again, it could have been a trick of my imagination. I don't know. But these kids and adults were up there. It was insane. They had these big blackout masks on. They did all these things. People were standing up making arm gestures and holding up A5 pieces of paper with things written on it, and they were telling us what the words were. And then there was a few, me too, skeptical. Then they did it again, but they took the masks off and put black tape, duct tape over their eyes, and then put the masks
Don't
back
forget
on.
the cotton. Like they put the cotton.
And the cotton.
and then the black, and then the
Yeah.
mask. It was, yeah.
And and are the parents behind there whispering to them? I don't think so, because I saw the woman on Danny Jones' podcast as well, and she was doing the same thing.
Yeah.
Dahlia something, I can't remember. And what do you think? What is the mechanism? What's in your? Because I can't get my head around it.
Well, it's the same thing that you experienced in the swimming pool or hovering over your body. So if you think about the human avatar, what gives us the ability to see something and to say that this is a glass is that you're taking in data, right? These photons of light are hitting the retina, they're activating the optic nerve, comes into the brain. Your brain compares it to things it's seen in the past. You may not have ever seen this glass, but it's a glass and there's a liquid, right? So all of that is happening based on the data that came in. And your consciousness is always there. It's not a function of the brain, which you've proven to yourself, right? So you have proven this
Yeah,
to yourself.
still
And
hard to
so
get that. It's still hard to process that
the
as a.
only thing that's hard is because you think that data can only come in through, like, visual data can only come in through your
I
eyes.
know. I know.
And that's just the mismatch in your thinking. Whereas the truth is it's consciousness that is aware of the data, but consciousness doesn't need these physical senses to acquire data. So just like you, just in reading that book and then remembering your swimming pool experience, you're like, so maybe I could be out of my body. And then lo and behold, you have this experience as you're in that liminal hypnagogic space. And it's only because you don't need your eyes to see. And you saw it in Basil. They don't need their eyes to see because our consciousness can tune into the field and get data. Because that's all it is. It's just data.
Have you tried it?
I have. I've had that experience for many years, but without knowing other people that did it. Whether it was seeing at a distance because there was a need. Like one time I was in Italy and my daughter was in Mexico. And I woke up at 2 a.m. and I just knew that there was something wrong. Okay, so a lot of people describe that as happening, but why? How is it we pick up information across the miles? You could say, yes, it's a mother being bonded to her daughter, whatever. But I've had those experiences with people I'm not super bonded to. And it's like, how is that possible? Because we live in this interconnected web of consciousness and we are consciousness. There is no separation. That's the whole illusion of duality. We think that I'm a separate self, but you're really not. You are consciousness. This just happens to be an interfacing system that you can more commonly relate to.
I wonder, when they said they have these courses, that the lady who was presenting that particular presentation, what you can go and do courses, and that children, 5-year-olds, pick it up in 5 minutes, and
Yeah, much
adults
faster than
take.
us.
Yeah, because their minds are still, they haven't been not pre-programmed is not the right word, conditioned and
Yeah,
programmed over life to be skeptical, because you can't go through life. There are limitations on how to survive in this modern world. I'm not entirely sure. That's, and it's certainly been programmed into us at school, and and our parents' generations, and that this stuff is nonsense.
yeah,
And even to the point of in Britain, at the country fairs, they used to have gypsies. You read your crystal
yeah,
ball, and
mhm,
you used to think, what a scam! These people are so dumb. I
yeah.
can't believe they're walking into this tent with this mysterious old lady. And now I'm starting to think, well, I've seen some things now, and maybe there is something to it. And I'm very keen to get my kids to go and do that,
That
course.
would be very cool.
Because what one of the ladies said, which she was talking about how this experience, learning how to do this, has changed her, and that was one of my things, was I was going to bring up there, because the kids, they were and I don't mean this in a bad way, but some of them looked or acted as if they had a form of autism, or certainly social, lacking in what we call normal social skills. I don't
Yeah,
know if
well,
you
she
picked it.
she did mention that many of the people the children who've come to her have been on the autism spectrum.
Right. Okay.
So I think it is, and mentioning that and the telepathy tapes, we do see people on this neurodivergent spectrum have a little more access to, the field of consciousness.
Yeah.
And I
Well,
think
that's
that's
it.
probably also why I have had it. I was never diagnosed with autism. I didn't get diagnosed with ADHD until late in life. But now I'm understanding that my apparatus, if you will, it has a different sensitivity.
Yeah. I'm going to come to ADHD. I want to talk
Okay.
to you about that as well. But yeah, so the one of the ladies, the adults, was talking about how it's changed her life and how it has it's made her. She says telekinesis, which I'm not entirely sure. I didn't quite catch the story she told about that, but how she's able to see things, which down pipes and things. So, and which I thought was pretty cool if you're a plumber. And the but it had awoken other
Yeah.
abilities that we humans have, which are dormant. Or is this something that's been hidden from us on purpose? Purposefully, we're told to deny. We're repeatedly told that this stuff is nonsense, and you know, telepathy is nonsense, and what we're talking about is nonsense. And so you say, well, this must be nonsense because people with white
Yeah.
lab coats are telling us this is nonsense.
Yeah.
Do you think this is a conspiracy against the human race?
Well, I would use less strong words about conspiracy against the human race, but I would say it's both. It's both cultural conditioning. We've grown up in a society that's like, yeah, that's weird. No, that didn't happen. So we're taught to distrust our own intuition and experiences. But where did that cultural conditioning come from? Now that's where you could get into more of a conspiracy. But if you look back on religion and mainly various Christian faiths where witches were burned, people who had knowledge without their five senses were considered demons or possessed or what have you. So it was also not safe to admit that you've had these experiences. Several years ago, I was working with a group in Denmark, and I had no idea that there was a strong presence of witches in Denmark. And I was explaining some marketing strategy with our branding and marketing company. And this woman said, I can't do that. And I'm like, of course you can. This isn't a difficult concept. And she was like, I was killed in a past life. I was burned at the stake for having too much knowledge. So I can't just go out there and share this knowledge. It brings up all of these reactions, full on trauma response. So if you think about it that way, knowing the cultural conditioning that people literally were killed for having these sort of extrasensory powers, there's a lot of reason why people have dismissed it. So if you
Mm.
follow that train for hundreds of years, yeah, most moms or grandmas are going to be like, oh, honey, that's just your imagination. That didn't really happen. But I think what we're seeing now with people like Tom Campbell being on all these podcasts and the telepathy tapes and all the others is that people are now realizing, well, wait a minute. These are credible people with scientific backgrounds. They're not out, and they're not even doing it for money.
No.
So they're not creating a religion or trying to control. So maybe, just maybe there's something to look at here.
Mm. It was kind of crazy as well because you were sat in the row in front of me, and I was sat next to a lady and I asked her, where have you come from? And she said, I've flown in from San Francisco to be here. And I went, wow, that's a long way to come. I
Yeah.
came a couple of hours in the train, right? And I said, what's the big deal? I wasn't sure if it was going to be maybe 20 people in a room or 3,000. I had no idea. Then I saw the hotel and I went, okay, this looks quite cool. That was one of the reasons I came, because I thought it'd be a small gig. And she said, "Oh, Tom Campbell doesn't do personal appearances anymore. He's 81 years old. He hasn't really got the time or inclination to do it anymore." And I thought, oh wow, okay, so I really did get lucky for that one.
Yes.
Yeah. And having listened to those podcasts, and I've listened to a few more subsequently, like I said, it's just so fascinating. And when you start, like you, I got because I joined the mailing list, I had to get the tickets. I got 2 free binaural beats
Right.
to download, and I use them, and they're very good, because I've used them
Yes.
before, the ones on YouTube and Spotify, but I don't think they're the right ones, because
No.
I
Because if
think,
you think about it, you're getting the purified and improved source. Like Bob Monroe was the one who started this whole binaural beat phenomenon, right? And that became hemisync, which were great. But then Tom's engineering background and all of that, he's improved it. And now we have, I don't know, 30 different tracks with different frequencies. So I highly encourage you to like get the bundle with these other ones, because you might find that a certain frequency band works really great for you now, and then in 6 months you need something different. But they're
interesting.
very useful for getting you into that zone where you become that single point of consciousness again, and you can do remote viewing, you can do distance healing, you can talk to other beings in other dimensions.
I find it, because I do get into the state, and as was extensively discussed, it seems to be that as soon as you want to get into a right brain, your creative side way of thinking, and then ignore your analytical left brain side, which, for me is very hard to do. As soon as I know when I'm in the state, I know when I'm in that, I can start, I'm going somewhere here, and then the left-hand side brain will pop up and say, "Oh, look, you're in that state," and it's gone.
Yeah.
It just can't help itself. And then I say to my subconscious, "You have to stop doing that, please, because I want to see how this goes." So I always get to that point. Sometimes it feels like I'm being trained by the hologram, by the simulation, is that you don't think about it, just go, keep going, keep reaching, and then you get to it was a house in the distance, and I could see it blurred, and then the more I reached out towards it, I could, more detail and things came up, and then finally, and it's going, keep going, don't think about it, keep going, go for it. And then I eventually got there, and I just heard this big yes, a big crowd cheer, and that's the closest I've been, and that was about a week ago, and I've not been able to get back there. So I'm really trying to get back, but it's
a practice like anything. You know, the more that you do it, and you'll get better at like letting go of the control. Like, okay, if nothing happens, it's okay. It's just another repetition. You know, you're going to get better at it.
You're going to get your reps in.
Yeah.
So a couple of episodes ago, in fact, 2 episodes ago, I did a podcast with a doctor, Swedish, who was a pediatrician. Name is Dr. Leif Elander. And he used to work with special needs kids. This was in the 2000s. And it was about this when ADHD became a thing. It came from nowhere, and then it became a thing. And he was extremely skeptical about the whole thing. And it's a really good podcast. He talks about it, that the long and short of it, his question was, why are you diagnosing these kids with something, and how are you doing it? Because I've been working with these kids for a long time. I understand their behavioral problems very, very well. But now you're coming along and saying that these drugs will fix it. I don't think that's the case. Let me see the research. And very long story short, they hid the 100,000 pages of research from him, refused to let him see it, even though the court said he could. Wow. And he went to court. And then they destroyed all that evidence, and they were criminally prosecuted for doing it. In fact, the dean of the University of Gothenburg got sacked, and, a big mess, right? And so I said, well, so what's the point? And he says, well, in his opinion and what he'd been reading, that the diagnosis for ADHD, let's say per 100 of the population, is probably half. So let's say 1 in 200 people, 0.5% would be what he would class as attention deficit disorder. And the rest, he said, it's probably nonsense. And he was saying that there was that parents were going to doctors asking them for ADHD diagnoses. Not only that, is that there is no gold standard way to diagnose somebody with ADHD. It's a lot of it's down to the psychologist, psychiatrist's opinion on the matter. And you mentioned you were diagnosed with ADHD. How did that come about?
Well, for most people, the diagnosis is about symptoms, looking at one's either current life or even the course of your life, and what were the symptoms. So you mentioned behavior. Behavior is one of the corollaries, but usually the key symptom is this inability to pay attention, or feeling like your attention is just flooded and you're hyperactive. And for me, it came after talking with several people who were diagnosed a little earlier than me. And they just kind of looked at me like, "You do know you're ADD, right?" I'm
Mm.
like, "What? Me? No, wait." And it's like, there would just happen to be a moment of intense stress that I needed to talk to a professional, and I started sharing some of my symptoms, and professional was like, "My friend, that's ADD."
Mm.
Um, but let me just ping in on one thing, because I grew up the daughter of a physician, and so from all of my life, my mother has been a doctor. She became a doctor when I was a baby. And I've watched how the practice of medicine has evolved, especially in America, because I'm American, and how things went from fee for service to this HMO model before drugs could ever be marketed. There was no marketing of drugs in magazines or television ads, right? When I grew up, even when I was in med school, about midway through medical school was when that shifted in the United States. But here's the thing. In our neighborhood, and listening to the patients that my mother took care of, it was like you described. It was maybe not 1 in 200, but one person a year that we would hear of that had a child. And that when you saw this child, even me as a
Mm.
non-professional, you could look and see like, "Oh, wow, their energy." And I'm not saying energy reading, like, "Oh, I can see this child would have a hard time like sitting still, focusing, whatever." What I'm seeing now is you see some of that very typical-ish outlier, but there is a spectrum, just like all parts of
Like everything.
neurodivergence.
Yeah.
Exactly. There's a spectrum. And I think what we're seeing now is that because these behaviors impact functioning at school or functioning in relationships, people are looking for more solutions. Now, the question is, why are we seeing so much more of it? Is it something genetic? Is it something just because people want drugs for their kids? Or is there something that has evolved over time such that the avatars that people are being born into have this feature? I'm saying this carefully because some people would call it a bug. You get something
Mm-hmm.
and, "Oh, this thing is bugging." I looked at my brain that way, like, "Oh, I've got these glitches, I've got these bugs." But what if this is actually a feature? Just like we didn't have certain features 100,000 years ago, our prehistoric ancestors, right? We evolved over time. So what if these are features that may not be serving us now, but they might be serving our species going forward?
Mm-hmm. It's a good point, because the part of schooling nowadays, or for the past for probably 100 years, is to educate you well enough to do what you're told and do it well, but
Exactly.
not enough to think for yourself. And that might be a controversial position, but I don't think it is. And
It's a true position.
well, without a doubt, in my mind, that is. And I did it was an online test, fair enough, but it was whether you have ADHD, and I was pretty sure that I was going to score very well in this particular particular test, and I did. And I thought, what a nonsense. And I remember my old school reports and even army reports and things, and it was the gist of it being, could do much better, needs to focus more on his work or work harder, whatever. And I was thinking, my parents, I said, this subject is lame. I don't like it. And if I'm not interested, I can't. I mean, I will pass it, fine. But, to sit and study is like the book is a magnet, and I've got the opposite magnet or the same magnet, and I'm trying to get close to the books and I can't,
Yeah.
you know? And, but I could still pass, just, by the skin of my teeth. And it's the whole thing. My younger brother, for instance, was also diagnosed, but he is a hyper person. And like you say, he probably is one of the outliers, but he absolutely point blank refused to take the medication. Which I thought, good for you, son. Well, brother, bro, good for you, bro.
Yeah.
Well done. And it annoys me because my friend's son was diagnosed with it as well, and he got the medication. And I said, mate, realize they're giving them meth, these kids, to give them focus. And he said, yeah, but he really enjoys it now. He can focus on his work. And you think that doesn't feel good to me.
Well, you've brought up something really interesting, and I want to tease it out. One is low attention because you just don't give a fuck. Like the subject is lame. Like I don't want to focus on that. Like this is always the question. Why is it that the kid can come in and spend hours glued to a video game that requires skill? Now, I'm not talking about a passive just binging watching. They're like actively engaged. And so you're talking about interest level, right? So
Mm-hmm.
that's one piece of it. But there is a component when we look at the neurochemistry of what does this amphetamine do for concentration by giving a little burst of dopamine and really helping someone focus. That's someone who may actually need it or can thrive because of it, whether they're being forced to do schoolwork that they didn't really want to or not. If they're feeling like I'm actually able to succeed in life, that's not a bad thing. Now, I'm not
Mm-hmm.
saying there is not Adderall
Yeah.
addiction because there definitely is. But I also think we need to look at this on a case by case basis. And that's why there are experts who can figure out your type because not all ADD or ADHD is the same. There is this spectrum, and you've really got to understand the brain chemistry, how that person reacts, and what are they trying to get out of it. So like your little brother, he's like, I don't need the medicine. Why would I take the medicine? Because he's probably got a certain level of acceptance and he's able to use the good features of his brain to his advantage. He's like, why would I
Mm-hmm.
want this medicated?
Fair enough. And I understand. When I say that, I think it's over subscribed or over diagnosed is my point. And I think I was chatting to a guy the other day about it on the podcast actually, and he was saying it's a superpower. I find the things I want to do, and that's
Yeah.
how I do it. So you mentioned an interesting point, and it was the fact that you had this decision. You wanted this decision. You were going to move to the south of France from America, and that was going to be your new life. I did a similar thing, and it was for me. It was leaving a very safe and lucrative job in Scotland to go to quit everything, sold my house, and move to the Swiss Alps because my voice inside me was saying, "You need to get out of here." Not because it's a bad place, and not because the job was bad, nothing like that. And everyone said, "What are you doing? You're nuts." And I said,
Right.
Listen, I can't. I I have to go.
Hmm.
There's nothing. If I could explain it, you'd know why. But I can't explain it. There was this force inside me, this attraction that I had to go. And so I did. And like I was single at the time, and then turns out I ended up getting married and having kids. And I've been here for 18 years now. And it was by far and away the best thing I've ever done. And that is one of the other things I wanted to talk to you about is we talk about consciousness, and it was to talk about the soul and intuition. And I think it all ties in with consciousness, soul, intuition is when you can tap into it. It's definitely a superpower, but sometimes I feel that the helpers, whatever these interdimensional beings that are here to help you out, are pushing you so hard that you just cannot resist it. That they're literally shouting in your face, "Get the hell out of here! You need to go there." And I've been trying to figure out: is that intuition? Is that your soul? Where's that coming from?
All of the above. It's consciousness. And if you believe that we live in a participatory universe, the field, source, God, larger consciousness system wants you to succeed. But, for the good of you, not like go win the lottery and then make your life hell. Like, the universe wants you to succeed. And so the universe or God or source or the larger consciousness system is always giving you data that you get to choose how you're going to interpret it and or act on it or not. And because you are willing to listen to some things and not others, sometimes the universe has to speak really loud. So those ones that, and I don't mean just like hearing voices, which I have had in my case, but where it's a full body thing where you're just like, I have no idea why I must go. And maybe it was
This was a
Go ahead.
this was a full body thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
I
And
could feel
so,
it in my bones, as they used to say, right?
yeah. And so maybe it was your higher self, your soul, or
Yeah.
your future self that was like, this is going to be really good for you. Like, listen, 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 listen. But what I will say this is we all have this capacity. And if we would be open to accepting it and learn to listen to it and actually train to develop it, it doesn't always have to be so loud. They
Mm-hmm.
can be just these little whispers and these little signs that you're like, oh.
And that was my next point. How do you tap into it? Because I have, so it lets me, the big decisions that I get this pressure to go and to do something. But for the innumerable other instances where I've made terrible choices, a long list of bad choices, life choices. And why don't those, where are they then
Hmm.
when I should be listening to them as well? How do I tap into this stuff?
Well, just like we talked about remote viewing or out of body, it's something you can train in. So part of it's intention. So setting the intention, I want to develop my intuition. I want to become more sensitive to higher states of consciousness. You set whatever that intention is for you, and then you practice it. So for many of us, we do say get into a trance or a receptive state through meditation. But you can do this in other ways. This is something that we lead experiments in the Recode Lab, where you can start to recode your software to be more sensitive in just your waking life. So you could literally say, okay, I want to develop my intuition. And what I specifically want is I want to see if I can get clues or cues from the outside world so that I don't have to have like my whole physiology knocked over, right? And so then you say, okay, for the next 30 days, I'm going to take note of anything that just seems a little weird. Like for most of us, when we talk about intuition, it's like it's a gut feeling or I just felt it in my bones. But what we're training in is how can I be aware of something even more subtle? Now, if you like feeling it somatically, that's great. I'm not saying you don't have to, but it could be, let me see something in this world. Show me a sign and let me be aware of it. So what are you doing? You're setting an intention into the field. And then you're also saying, I am now going to look for it because you have to participate. And so whether that's every week you write down any little things, or I like to do it on a daily basis. Was there any little weird thing that came up? Writing them down. Now, the reason we do these experiments over 30 days is so that you have enough data to notice if there are any patterns. Because most people, when they try something new, they're like, well, I wasn't able to get out of body, or I didn't see anything, and they give up. But I'm like, but you didn't do it long enough. Because if you get in more reps and then you have data to look back on, you'd be like, oh, wait a minute. You might notice your pattern. Maybe your pattern is hearing things. Maybe your pattern is coincidences that you see, in everyday life. Maybe it's in your dreams. Maybe it is in your body. Like each of us has a different sensitivity when it comes to how we get these nudges or pings. So that's what I would say is choose to make it your intention and train in it.
Mm-hmm.
And then
And
join us in the Recode Lab so we can talk about it again.
sure, where is that? Where do you do this?
We do this online, and we're doing it in partnership with the Consciousness Hub. It's on the third Wednesday of every month. So at 5 p.m. Paris time, we meet on Zoom and we have a discussion, some sharing. I lead a guided attunement activation, and then you create your 30-day experiment, and then you come back next month and we look at the data. And so you get to do this in real time with other people who are going to ask questions, you're going to share, so that you're not alone in this consciousness exploration phase.
That sounds pretty interesting. Yeah, I'm in. Let's do it.
Sweet. Awesome.
What's it? What do you call it?
It's called the Recode Lab.
Recode Lab. All right, let
Yeah.
me note that
So you
down.
can find it on the Consciousness Hub, or you can find it on my website, 1drea.com.
1drea.com. How are you for time? Are you okay?
Yeah, I think I have a few more minutes.
Okay, right. Well, we'll begin to wrap it up. This has been great.
Yeah, it's been fun.
One thing I wanted to ask you. So do you have any techniques? So, and I'm sure everyone gets this. I think it's probably a part of the lucid dreaming and stuff as well. Is, in that liminal state between wakefulness and sleep, you start seeing things extremely it's like a real life, but your eyes are closed, lights are out, and like I said, the left brain kicks in and it disappears. Like a dream, when you wake up after a really good dream, within a few minutes when you try to rationalize it, it's gone.
Right.
Do you obviously clearly understand what I'm saying about this, and how does one train? Is that, or just going back and we're going around in circles, you're going to tell me you just have to keep training at it and you'll get better?
No, I have a specific technique that I teach and that I use myself. And that is, you have to have a routine. You have to have a protocol. And it's not just practice. Well, what does the practice look like? So from the first time that you're just noticing that you're starting to wake up, before you reach for a phone or turn on a light or anything, just as you described, you're starting to see stuff. So just create your own protocol. So the protocol might be, I'm just going to name in my head what I'm seeing. Because what you described, like with dreams, our dreams, as soon as you really open your eyes, they can start to get super misty and kind of float away. So it's nice if this works for you, to just have a protocol of anchoring. Like, just as you're seeing things, you're like, oh, I'm seeing this light, or I'm seeing me, a week from now doing this. Just a couple of words before that critical mind could be coming in. And so if your left brain comes in and starts to say, yeah, but we need to go take a shower, we need to go. It's like, wait a minute, I've already dedicated this 10 minutes for this. So you be quiet. Let me go back to noticing. Ideally, you won't have to have so many conversations, because the consciousness, if you just, almost like, think of it as a video game. Right? Normally when you spawn into a video game, you're like checking out the terrain, like getting your bounds. You might look at your HUD to see how many weapons, how many points do I have? Do I need energy? Whatever. If you did that in the morning as you're just waking up and you're like, I am the consciousness using this avatar. What am I seeing? What's in my field here? It's putting you in the witness position. And the consciousness, you could call it soul if you want, isn't usually judgmental, snarky, dismissive. It's just the non-judgmental witness. So if you can practice in that, to just say, what am I seeing? Oh, I'm seeing this, I'm seeing that. No judgment, just naming. That's one of the protocols we use in the morning, that helps you just sort of reorient. Like, who are you? When you're waking up, who are you? Are you the neurotic being that's already thinking about the whole day and da-da-da-da? Or could you be the soul that is using this avatar? Yes, you have things on your calendar for the day, but you're coming in it as soul awareness. And that's a beautiful place to start. If you start in the morning before you've interacted much with the outside world, by the time you do get to having tea with your wife or the kids or whatever, if you're just bringing that sense of presence in, you're going to notice things much more acutely than if you were just in the robot that's like, got to get the lunches, got to get the things, got to get, you know what I'm saying? There's two ways to kind of use these eyes. You can look at it from the ego, which is all of this programmed meat here and all the wiring that's been conditioned, or you can bring it from the soul and say, okay, I know there's some conditioning there, and I am the witness.
That's probably a good place to finish it. Daess. That was fascinating. I have to say, that was brilliant.
Well, I've enjoyed this. I mean, it's been very interesting to hear your stories too. I can't wait to hear, like, a year from now when you've been doing more of this. Like, it'll be exciting.
Well, I've got more of those kind of what we would call, nudges from one's deeper self,
Mm.
higher self rather, deeper, I don't know. And
Deeper, higher, whatever, truer.
yeah, it's just, I love when it happens, and I really would like to be able to tune in to things when it
Mhm.
really
Mm.
counts. It's
Yeah.
what a power, what a superpower to have. And
Yeah, well, we'll have to talk about that the next time we do one of these
yes,
conversations. I'd love
absolutely.
that.
Yeah, absolutely. So just one more time, your website is the number 1DREA
DREA. Yes,
dot com,
1drea.com, and I'm on
1drea.com.
social media, YouTube. You can join us, for all sorts of videos and master classes for free, and then, of course, if you wanna come and hang out, we do retreats in Holland. We do
Oh,
a psilocybin truffle retreat for people who are okay with psychedelics.
mhm.
We do full medical screening and all of that, but, yeah, would love to connect with more folks.
On that, can I make one final question? I
Yeah.
promise. I promise. I mentioned this in the last one because my friend was talking about psychedelics and using psychedelics and how he's moved away from them. He's not really into it anymore. And I'm not a big user. I've not done ayahuasca or anything like that. Some magic mushrooms, LSD, things like that. And my higher self is telling me that you can, me, Nicole, can achieve these states without psychedelics. What's your view on that?
I absolutely believe the same, and it's been my
Hmm.
experience. I've been working with people with psychedelics since the early 2000s, starting with LSD for couples therapy and stuff in the United States, in Washington, D.C., and then I got additional training after my own psychedelic experiences with ayahuasca and psilocybin mushrooms. And yes, I think this is a function of the human avatar. We have the ability to get into expanded states of consciousness. Psychedelics are one way to get there. Breath work, chanting, whirling, fasting, and lucid dreaming. Like there are all these other ways. The binaural beats, sound can get us there, drumming. So it's an innate capacity. It's a capacity of the human avatar to get into expanded states. So you don't need psychedelics. Now,
Mm,
there are some people who have benefited from psychedelics on the more therapeutic side. And that's the kind of therapy
yeah.
that I provide. It's psychedelic assisted therapy. And that's particularly useful for people with trauma. Now, yes, there are plenty of people who don't have trauma and they just use it to trip because it's fun or it's
Yeah.
exciting. But I tend to um, dissuade people from doing that because it sometimes can create a sort of dependence. Like they feel like they need these substances just to get there, and you don't. But if it's in a healing capacity and if it's going to help someone on their healing journey, then I'm all for it. So I have a ton of content on YouTube and on my website about that, on how to prepare for psychedelic journeys, how to integrate them. I have a bundle of meditations and a guidebook that are really, really helpful. We just wrapped up our third cohort of training facilitators to use my trauma informed approach because it's not good if you just do this on your own. Because if you do have something that blows your mind wide open, you come back into what we call 3D reality and it doesn't match what you've experienced, that can be very off-putting and
Yeah.
dangerous.
Well, okay. I mean, I think we've all had that experience. So, Daess 1drea, and that is what a perfect way to finish that. That was fantastic. So I'm going to let you go now. I know you're very busy and I really appreciate you coming on. And
Thank you
so
so
thank
much.
thank you very much. And thanks for
This has
listening.
been so much fun.